Thank you. Well, I thought we'd start with some word association tied to the question that frames my talk for tonight, and that is, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? And when you hear this question, I just want you to think with your gut. What comes immediately to mind? What kind of ancestor do you want to be? Wise? Yes, please. Supportive. He said supportive? Wow, thank you. Responsible? Thoughtful? Eccentric? Adventurous. Oh, that's part of it. One more. A leader. Yeah, I first heard this question. I didn't even have one word. I was so stopped in my tracks by this question. What kind of ancestor do you want to be? And it was posed to me 10 years ago this month. I was on the White Earth Reservation in Minnesota. And I was there for what I thought was a really clever research project, very academic. I was taking this famous conservationist philosopher, Aldo Leopold, and his works, and I was trying to visit sort of environmental justice leaders from communities of color around the world to see whether or not Aldo Leopold was relevant to their version of environmentalism. And I thought I had this really clever framework, this perfect quote from Leopold to set up the question for these great leaders. And when I arrived on the White Earth Reservation to interview Winona LaDuke, you may remember the name as Ralph Nader's running mate from back in the day, she didn't want to interview with me right away. She had me chopping wood to set up for winter. It was this time of year. She had me working in the cafeteria of the school, helping with a farm-to-table effort for the indigenous young people in that community. And I sensed that she wanted me to experience the place before I could even ask her this question. And in my time waiting, I ran into a man named Michael Dahl. And he wanted to know why. He was really an intellectual guy. He was one of the spiritual leaders of that community. And he was really interested to be talking to a philosophy professor. He dabbled in it in college, and he was excited to talk with me. And he wanted to hear why I was there. And I was like, oh, God, he's going to love this. He's going to think I'm so smart and so cool. And I share this thing about Aldo Leopold and Winona LaDuke, and he just stops me. And he goes, the only question that matters I saw on my sister's Facebook page this morning. What kind of ancestor do you want to be? And it's taken me 10 years to even begin to wrestle with this question, because I'm not even sure I know what an ancestor is. I think I had to crack open the word and understand that what kind of ancestor do you want to be is not about being remembered, right? It's about always and already in this moment seeing yourself as an ancestor, whether or not you're remembered, whether or not you ever have kids. It's not about biology. And so then it becomes a question of who are your ancestors? And how do you go on a life journey of infinitely expanding people across your community, across cultures around the world, and finding wisdom in what they have to say, whether it's people who have passed away, or if it's living elders or contemporaries or young people. One of the authors of this in this book with me, Robin Wall Kimmerer, doesn't call them descendants. She calls them ascendants, right? And she sees herself as borrowing her land from her unborn ascendants, right? And so an ancestor is not necessarily someone who's passed away in my family, right? Someone even related to. And I'm not a good ancestor based on whether or not I'm remembered by someone in my family after I've died. I am always and already an ancestor seeking ancestral wisdom from humans living and no longer living and not yet born. The question itself collapses past, present, and future into a now where we are all empowered to be great ancestors. There's another very important layer, though. I came to realize that it wasn't just humans that were my ancestors, but the land itself. If any of you have ever read the book The Overstory by Richard Powers, in this book he talks about the Douglas fir tree as an example of a great elder. And in the moment of death, a Douglas fir tree will release all of its nutrients into a sort of fungal system in the soil to share with the rest of the forest. right? I'm pushing 50. I'm intimidated by that Doug fir tree. I'm not even sure if I'm going to be able to find a way, with I hope the second half of my life, to share all the kinds of wealth I've generated in my life. But that tree is my teacher, right? That tree is my ancestor. And so what kind of ancestor do you want to be comes down to, have we developed the skill set for learning from each other across cultures, across different human ways of knowing, across generations? Have we developed that skill set of cultural humility to truly listen to each other in a divided world? And have we developed the sort of ecological literacy to learn from the more than human realm that sustains us with ecosystem services, but that we also owe back our own ancestry, our own wisdom to that natural world that sustains us? Sounds all very abstract and very vague, so I want to make it very concrete for you, rooted in where we are. And I want to share with you, because we're about to see those first snows on the peaks. Technically, we saw them about a month ago, but we're about to see those first snows on the peak. And for me, snow is the most important ancestor to me, and it's my measuring stick for how I'm being as an ancestor. So I want to read just a small section from my essay, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? As you heard, my daughters and I are trying to reach 100 consecutive months of skiing. And so every summer we have to go snow hunting, right? We have to find those snow fields that cling to those north-facing slopes that maybe received a lot of wind deposits the winter before. And sometimes we'll hike 4 hours for, 15 turns. And one summer I learned a lot from snow. Snow hunting is a challenge that has also taught my daughters about their mountains, about those first trickles of water that lead from the snow patches of the Elk Mountains to the tributaries of the East and Gunnison rivers, until the Colorado River returns those waters to the Pacific Ocean, and eventually until the cycles of life return the moisture right back home as new snow to renew our dance and the dance of life. Snow renews the cultures and ecosystems of the West, and it also renews my bond with my daughters. Snow is sacred. One powder day, when my daughter first really learned how to let go between turns where you're weightless, and she'd already known that snow is the basis of all the water, right, of all human and more than human life in the West. She goes, "Dad, is snow God?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Well, I feel like heaven on it, and it's the source of all life. How's that not God?" I'm like, smart kid. Whenever we worry that we might miss a month or fall short in finding snow somewhere new, we look to Ewell Pass, old reliable. Just west of Crested Butte, Colorado, Ewell Pass sits at 11,300 feet, tucked between the dark slate of Purple Mountain and the orange scree of Cinnamon Mountain. Since 1992, it's my 30th anniversary, I have skied the heart-shaped snow of Ewell Pass in September. Adelia, my older daughter, has skied it 5 times with me, and in 2018, we were eager to initiate Seoul. But when we arrived, the snow was gone. There was a small, dirty strip on the steep underbelly of the snowfield, and the rest of this water tower for the west was literally reduced to rubble. My daughter Adelia and I could ski it, but Seoul just didn't have the skills for being on a little strip like that. The laughs were not as hearty. As an environment and sustainability professor at Western Colorado University, I know the studies well. The winter Elk Mountains could see a 75-day reduction in ski season due to climate impacts by 2090. But what does this reduced snowpack mean for ranchers, for forest fires, for the indigenous homelands of the Southwest downstream, for alpine, subalpine, semi-desert, and riparian species relying on waters from those snows, for bird migrations through this corridor, for the urban civilizations relying on western reservoirs, for the peoples of Mexico at the bottom of an unjust water distribution system? These are not abstract thoughts and concerns. And I feel a call to fight against these climate injustices when I contemplate the social and ecological impacts of climate change. But the disappointment in Seoul's eyes as she looked down upon the dwindling snowfield of Ewell Pass conveyed something more powerful than all of the data on climate chaos I'd seen for a quarter century. I saw loss in her eyes, grief. It triggered my own visceral sense of loss of a way of life, loss of a way of being, loss of our playful interconnectivity. We're the very basis of life for all beings. I'll never forget that look on Soul's face. It was a look that called me out, that stretched my actions to the reality, livelihood, ecosystem services, and connectivity of unborn generations. It was a look that asked me, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? And so for me, snow, which I love playing on with my kids, fuels my fire, right? To continue to find playful and serious ways to confront climate change, right? But it also is a measurement for me. If my children's children show a 7th generation of Hausdoerffer ski bums in this valley skiing in August, then maybe I did some small thing to be a great ancestor, right? And I think the closest I've come to creating something lasting with my colleagues and with my students has been over the last 8 years. At Western, we created the Master in Environmental Management program. In the second year, instead of a thesis, students are to complete a 600-hour project anywhere in the world. We've had master's projects. We have a student right now in the Himalayas. We've had students in Kenya, Costa Rica, serving organizations to accelerate their ability to achieve their vision, to extend the reach of overextended organizations worldwide. The program is putting out 25,000 hours of projects per year, every year, and thanks to the generosity of Butch Clark, for which the Clark Family School of Environment and Sustainability is named, those projects will last as long as there's a Western. 25,000 hours per year, right? Trying to enact playful, creative, politically serious, inventive, collaborative climate actions out of this valley going around the world. And so for me, when I think, what kind of ancestor do I want to be, it's not necessarily even through my actions, right? It comes down to 3 things, right? I know my place. I know my snowpack. I know what about this place makes me, most joyful, and most clear on whether or not I'm being responsible to the source of life that rests above me that I can see out my door every day. 1, I know my snow through knowing my place. 2, I'm connected deeply with my kids. My ascendants are my teachers, right? For whether or not my solutions are in fact playful or just exhausting, right? Because using doom and gloom data and guilt alone is only going to exhaust the next generation, right? And 3, I try to leave some institution in place, right? That'll create some engine of change through the creativity of my colleagues and my students and generosity of people like Butch Clark, that 25,000 hours a year, every year, as long as there's a Western, we can ignite and empower students to ignite and empower communities to make this world more livable and more playful. So, thank you.